Hello and welcome to the Mars Retrograde video. We will be discussing the Mars Retrograde that is going to happen October 30th of this year in 2022, and it will last till the new year, and that is January 13th. So we have approximately 2.5 months of a Mars retrograde coming up. Now, Mars has a 2-year orbit around the zodiac, and that means that when it goes retrograde, it is often once every 2 years and lasts approximately 2 months. Mars is a very important planet for us because it's about our energy level. It is about our vitality. It is about our ability to be motivated, to take action, to go after something, our leadership skills, our desire to fight for what is right. It is that internal warrior energy that you need, the drive to make something happen. So also it is about our sexuality, it's about our instinct, and quite necessary to be able to do things, to go after our goals. So Mars is a very vital planet in that sense. Now, when it goes retrograde, from our point of view, it seems that it's going backwards. So it is slowing down. It has to do with the orbit in our solar system. It is slowing down, and that means that all the things that Mars represents is slower too. Our energy, our vitality, our lust to do something, to go after something is much lower in this period. Even our libido might drop because it represents sexuality. So we might not know what we're fighting for, or what is driving us. Now, a retrograde is a beautiful cosmic event that's intended to reevaluate, to reflect. These RE words are what the retrogrades are about. So because it's slowed down, there's the need to have more rest, to reflect. That slowness is quite necessary to do that reflective behavior, to see what is motivating you and how can you change your drive or your motivation, and maybe even your goals. So, but this year, Mars retrograde is in the sign of Gemini, and that's quite interesting for a multiple of reasons. But Gemini is actually a very active sign. It's all over the place. It is very curious. It loves to learn, and it's about communication. So it loves to take in information, share information. It represents the mind, as it is ruled by the planet of Mercury. So it's very much about words and how we speak, how we write. A lot of ideas can come up in a Gemini energy. And as I said, it's very much about words, the use of words. Now, words are very important, and we're finding that out more and more in this world, that words are actually spells, and spells create. So this reflection period with Mars and Gemini going retrograde, it's also very important to look at how you are communicating, how your words are affecting your life, and to look at how your mind is operating, and can you improve your communication levels? Can you learn more? Or what is it that you need to learn to go after your goals in a much more effective way? Now let's talk more about Gemini, because that's where the Mars retrograde is going to be in, right? But more importantly, actually, a little detail, Mars is in Gemini for a very long time, 7 months in total. So that's a very long period for Mars to be in the sign. That's why it's very important to understand what Gemini is about, right? So to look at some of the topics that Gemini represents, it's more about your immediate environment. It is the stuff that is close by. It is your hood, your neighborhood, your neighbors. It's your everyday, daily life environment. It is about movement, mobility, close by mostly. As I said, it's about communication. It's about news. And when it's retrograde, since it's going backwards, the energy, we could think of maybe old news coming up or need some reflection, you know? It's definitely about words. I can't emphasize this enough. How good you are with words, the play on words, the use of words, what words actually represent, meaning what kind of frequency do they have? What do they really mean? You know, are you sure of the words that you're using? And can you reflect more on those themes? It's a very verbal sign. It's a very expressive sign. Now, Gemini is the twins, right, of the zodiac. It's the Roman numerology 2. So that's very significant as well. It represents duality, meaning two things. Opposition, polarity, that's also involved. And physically, it means 2 hands, 2 arms. It also represents our lungs. So anything you do with your hands, or the breath that we use, the air that we breathe, is also a topic that could be involved around this Mars retrograde period. It's also the 2 meaning perspective. So what perspective are you using? Can you look at it from 2 sides? It also represents siblings, cousins, aunts, uncles, so immediate family, right? Immediate family that aren't your parents, basically. And it's very much about learning. How are you learning? What do you need to, what kind of knowledge or information do you need to accumulate and process? So yeah, it's the information that you're taking in, right? Gemini is very much about asking questions. It's that curious mind that wants to learn, and that's why a very right thing to do is ask questions, to understand better, to evolve, to enhance your mind and how you're using that. Because it's 2, right? It represents this number of 2. It could mean that sometimes you might be needing to do something twice or double, right? Very retrograde-ish, that you would have to go over something more than once in this period. It's about the mental stimulation very much. And it's a sign of movement. But when it's retrograde, maybe it's a sign of going backwards a little bit, right? Going a little bit back to some old ways, some old thinking, old information, and reflect upon that and what it means and how it could affect your life moving forward. Now, characteristics of Gemini are, more about its nature, that it's adaptable, it's easily changing. That's why it's the chameleon of the zodiac. It's curious, it's street smart, it is very clever. Gemini is the active mind. It's fast, it's rapid, it's a very quick pace. Gemini is talkative, social, and friendly. And it's about decisions, choices that you can mentally weigh in your mind. And usually it's about multiple options, right? Because there's at least two when Gemini is involved. So I guess many things going on at the same time. That's a very Gemini thing. Gemini is a multitasker, right? It's playful, flirty, and charming as an energy. And I guess the higher expression of Gemini is understanding to listen, because it tends to speak a lot, but when you really want to learn the gold stuff, the really valuable stuff, you need to learn to listen as well. And I think it ties with the retrograde energy that it's a period where things are slower. You need to slow down, and I think listening really fits that mold, right? Now, what are the sort of negative characteristics of Gemini? Something you can fall for in this period, right? Could be the mental cavities to watch out for, to not fall into. So Gemini is very distracted because it does so much, because it's interested in so much. It's hard to focus on only one thing for a Gemini energy. It's slightly immature, that toddler energy, very youthful and spirited, but kind of, it's impatient because it's so distracted. It finds it hard to finish something, especially with Mars being in retrograde. That's one of the biggest ways to explain this energy. What will be very hard to finish something. And that is kind of frustrating to Mars. It loves to finish something. As Gemini is very good with communication and words, it can be really cunning as well. It can be easy to lie and tell lies. So be careful of that, and be careful to not fall into that. It can be very indecisive, not knowing which options to choose, which possibilities to go after. Another Mars Gemini theme. As it loves to talk, and as it is a talkative energy, it tends to gossip. And obviously that's a negative thing to do. You lose energy and time, and it's a negative energy that sticks around. You don't really want to do that. Now, Gemini sometimes also tends to be a bit superficial. It's so active and interested, but doesn't go into that depth. So it can tend to look at things face value, Another thing that people aren't a lot aware of is that Gemini can also be very moody, because it's so active and entertaining. It has that other side where it needs to recharge, and that moodiness is often, more seen in a homely, resting time of someone's life. But remember that there is a moodiness to the Gemini energy as well. It can be very flaky, changing, independable, also very nosy. It's a part of that gossip thing, I think. And it can tend to be unreliable because, you know, it has so much to do in its mind and it's not focused enough to complete. It can also be two-faced and restless and inconsistent, right? So those are sort of the negative traits of Gemini. Now, the ruler is Mercury, right? Mercury rules the mind, communication, mobility, technological devices, electronics, and also, more significant, it is the messenger. It's about information. And again, words. So remember that those topics will be key in this Mars retrograde energy in Gemini. As Mars is about our physical energy, our vitality, it's also on the other side of the spectrum. It's about aggression, anger, accidents, cuts, bruises. So be careful with this Mars retrograde energy, that your focus will be, you know, less. You'll be less focused. So accidents might be easier around the corner. So watch out for that, right? Careful with anything in traffic, with mobility. Look twice, very Gemini. Make sure that you are safe to cross a road. Be careful with your hands, your arms, your lungs, your breath. Careful with words. Pick your words carefully. You could have arguments around words, right? Or arguments in general. And there's this overall energy of being much less focused than normal, and hence the accident proneness, right? Normally Mars is a very direct energy and very straightforward. So is kind of Gemini actually, but when it's retrograde, that might all be a little bit less, and our confidence and courage level might be a lot less. Our lust and desire might be a lot more low, which is why Mars retrograde periods aren't the greatest time to begin a relationship, to get married, or start a very fresh new project. Now, due to a natural retrograde energy of more going backwards, more reflective, and less focus, is why it's not advisable to start something very new, right? The difference is that if you have Mars retrograde in your chart natally, so if you were born under a retrograde Mars, then actually these things don't apply to you a lot because you're very familiar with that Mars retrograde energy. You were born into it. So for you, it might actually be a more comfortable time and less dangerous to start something new, right? Now let's look at some of the important dates and patterns that this Mars retrograde is making to other planets and how that's significant for this long Mars in Gemini retrograde period. So to start with a little bit of a background information, it's very interesting that we've had some eclipses quite recently in this Gemini area that Mars is going over. To be very detailed, if you know a little bit more about astrology, Mars retrograde starts at 25 degrees of Gemini and goes back towards 8 degrees and 8 minutes of Gemini. So it's between 25 and 8 degrees of Gemini that it goes back and forth. That's important to look for in your own chart to see what area is affected by Mars retrograde. That's when you know what more specifically applies to you. So for instance, if it's the 9th house that this Gemini energy is in, and it could be more houses than only one, by the way, that Gemini between 25 and 8 degrees represents, or 8 degrees and 25 minutes of Gemini, is if it's the 9th house, that's about travel, international travel, education, higher education. It's about your belief systems. So that will be affected by Mars retrograde, right? Stuff like that you can look into for you specifically. The eclipses that happened in Gemini were November 30th of 2020. We had a lunar full, that means a full moon eclipse in Gemini around 8 degrees of Gemini, 8 degrees and 45 minutes to be very specific. That's exactly where in the new year 2023 Mars will go direct. So that's pretty interesting. It's literally going to that eclipse point. It's really emphasizing that point. It almost means like we're moving on from the havoc that 2020 and 21 caused our lives, right? We had to deal with a lot of changes, massive changes, a lot of information that was poured upon us. And it was very hard to understand what is true, what is not true. You know, a lot of misinformation, right? That modern word, very Gemini word. So our minds have been very overloaded. And I think it's pretty interesting that we've had eclipses in Gemini and Sagittarius in those extreme years of 2020 and 2021. So in 2021, at June 10th, we had a solar eclipse, which means that it's a new moon at 19 degrees and 42 minutes of Gemini. So you can really see that these two eclipse points from the last 2 years are activated again by this Mars retrograde. Activated in the sense that it's reactivated because it needs reflection, needs for us to go over it, to process, to nit and pick what is important, or ask more questions about those things that played, you know, to dive a little bit deeper, especially because when Mars goes retrograde, October 30th, it does so with a trine to Mercury at 1 degrees of Scorpio. That's the chart of Mars retrograde start, right? The start of Mars retrograde. So that means that Mars will be, meaning your energy and your mind, will be very focused on diving more deep, asking questions, being that detective, excavating some secrets, some hidden information that you will investigate most likely. So it's a very inquisitive time, this Mars retrograde in Gemini, right? Also very interesting, October 30th, when it goes retrograde, Mars is squaring Neptune. That's a very big energy that's basically ongoing this entire 2.5 months, or at least definitely a very long time of the Mars retrograde period. Mars is squaring Neptune. So I will talk about that a little bit more in depth, but pretty significant that it starts that way and it's ongoing. Now that's kind of dangerous because our minds are very, you know, trying to find truth, brutal truth, finding enhancing our perspective, trying to understand better, ask those questions, trying to weigh the information, right? But then there is this very uncomfortable pushing energy between Neptune that just can cloud everything, can make it very illusionary, can enhance the lies and the confusion around information. So that can be actually more difficult. And with this energy, there might be this greater need to either be very mentally preoccupied, or on the other side, just the great desire to escape and fantasize and, follow illusionary paths. The only positive thing about this is that it starts with Neptune retrograde. Now, when Neptune is retrograde with this tension with Mars, it actually gives more of a clear view than normal, because Neptune can really create a lot of confusion normally. But as it's retrograde, it's actually more clear. So this is a little window of opportunity, I believe, to use your intuition, because it is my own understanding, because I went through it, that in this day and age, at this time that we're living here on planet Earth, we need to have a very strong intuition, and that's what Neptune in Pisces, to me, definitely represents, okay? So your intuition is a skill. Our intuition has been blocked for several reasons. We have learned to dismantle our intuition. Most of us have, okay, on this planet. So it's a whole journey to go inwards and to reconnect to that intuition that is always there. It's just a difference between if it's dormant, activated, or inactivated, right? So it is your will, very Mars word, your will and motivation to activate that dormant intuitive energy, because that's the only way for you to know what is true and what is not. If you can weigh information on the scales of your intuition, that's when you will know what is real, what is true, or at least what is real and true for you. And that's what matters. So, even though this is a square, and that's very a pushing conflict energy, it is ultimately a manifestation energy. So this pushes maybe us to be very mentally preoccupied, to clear that mental situation that we are all having, and go after more what you really believe in and what you really feel is right. On the other hand, this is a conflict between being too much in the mind and belief, trust, and surrender into a bigger picture. So that's the conflict between Neptune and Mars here. I guess this astrological tension says that those two cannot be, in an important place together at once, because they're conflicting, right? But I say, maybe that's right, because our mental field is actually a minefield. This is a really big concept, but our mind is two layered. So we have the conscious, daily operating part of our brain, and then we have our subconscious. It's where a lot of patterns are programmed. It's ancestral, hereditary issues. It's beliefs that we don't know where it came from, behavioral aspects and all that. Actually, what really dictates our daily life is usually our subconscious mind. It is said that 90% of our, cognitive behavior, of our general behavior is influenced by our subconscious mind, and only 10% of it is conscious awareness, usually. So that means that there is a really big part that we need to understand about the subconscious mind. And I believe that is why this shadow work has been coming up in the New Age spiritual world, where we are pushed to go into that depth of our mind and look at these patterns and blockages that is obstructing our daily lives, right? It's holding us back in some way. And it's about really understanding how that subconscious mind works and how it affects our daily life. So I feel that this square is related to that because, Mars and Gemini is about the mind. But what part of the mind, right? It's true that there's actually a two-part of the mind. As I said, there's a conscious mind and there's a subconscious mind, which is often an unconscious situation. Most people don't know what is driving them. What is the programs that is laying in that subconscious area. The subconscious mind can also be very instinctive behavior. So that's very Mars-like. The fight, flight, or run amygdala part of our brain is also subconsciously motivated, fear. It's a very subconscious emotion. Most emotions probably are, unless you make them conscious and aware. And it's quite a process to be able to do that. And I think that's where Neptune comes in, where you need to expand your perspective, where you need to look at things from a much higher perspective to be able to understand these things. Gemini, I suppose, is more the rational mind, facts and information, sort of, whatever facts are. And then Neptune in Pisces is a knowingness, it's cosmic information. It is a higher understanding of energy, of emotions, of our real drive to be, divinely guided, to be divinely connected. So there's that struggle during this Mars retrograde as well of implementing more trust and belief and surrender in a higher power. But it's dangerous to say that because I don't mean, what kind of higher power. But I really mean the divine power, the cosmic power, that the creational force, the source energy that has, truly created everything that we're truly connected to. So there's that conflict between our minds and the divine aspect. There's a conflict between information, rational mental behavior, facts, figures, and maybe lies that are factually spread, you know, lies that may be factually based. So, as I said, the only way for you to know what's true, the only way for you to be aware is to link to your own intuition. If you're not, you might get lost. You might not know what's going on and where you're going, and what's really motivating you, right? So there's indeed a very big reflective energy going on, but it requires, it's interesting because Mars is about action, right? And this does require a lot of action, really does, to be able to know your subconscious motivations, to know what's your intuition, right? To know what's a lie and what isn't. That takes a lot of action. That takes a lot of energy. But in this modern world, we don't see that as success. We see that as boring because you need to be quiet to tap into intuition. You know, if you're too much about the divine, it sounds fuzzy wuzzy, it's not rational. What do you mean truth and untruth, you know? So it's very relevant that this energy will force us to slow down and to force us to listen more to your intuition, to look more into your subconscious mind and the drive that is secretly making you navigate your life in a certain way, you know? So, as I said, that Neptune-Mars square is ongoing, right? So, it's there at the October 9th full moon in Aries, and it lasts till December 5th for sure, because that's a 5-degree orb. And as this is a very important aspect, I feel that the 5-degree orb really does stand for this. But there's also on December 8th a new moon where it's, you know, it's a little bit further apart, but I do believe that's pretty significant as well. I do feel that with that new moon, December 8th, which is a Gemini new moon, all right, it's conjunct Mars. 8 December, the new moon in Gemini is conjunct Mars retrograde in Gemini. That is very significant. That means by the time that this retrograde is starting, which is October 30th, right? But this square with Neptune and Mars is actually starting around October 9th. But by the time Mars goes retrograde October 30th, there is this period until December 5th, I would say, that we are going over the themes that I just mentioned about Neptune in Pisces, squaring Mars in Gemini, that mind versus spiritual awareness, that mind versus intuition, seemingly rational, factual information versus a higher perspective and knowingness, weighing information on the scale of your intuition to know what's real, what's true, to have more faith, more trust and surrender, not in whatever is occurring in this world, but in that divine source connection. Because when you're powered, when your energy is powered through that, because Mars is about energy, vitality, and motivation, then you have the biggest power. If you're aligned to the original divine energy, then you have unlimited supply of energy. Whereas if you are trying to generate your little own energy in this little old world with this big changing times, you might get really lost. Might not be enough energy to get you going, you know? But then there is December 8th, only 3 days after this square with, you know, Neptune kind of coming to a little end. You have this new moon. So I feel that December 8th is an important point in this retrograde energy of Mars. It's starting a new chapter, even though it's still retrograde till the beginning of the year. But there's a turning point around December 8th. We're feeling into that Gemini aspect of ourselves. And that's also related to the house that this Mars retrograde is playing in. So that turning point will usually happen, well, it's at 16 degrees of Gemini, that turning point. So whatever house 16 degrees of Gemini falls in for you is where there's a new chapter opening, in the sense of what you're motivated with, why you're doing something, how you're going after something, how you're using your energy, and how you're using your mind, how you're processing information, how to decide what's true and not. You can see that with the house that it's occurring in. If you followed me a little bit longer, you know I'm interested in patterns, pattern recognition, because, you know, it's about geometry, so it's very significant when patterns are being formed to look at them. Now, at the full moon in Capricorn, December 23rd, right before Christmas, there's a yod, and a yod means the finger of God, so it's very significant, divine point to look at. And of course, Mars retrograde is involved in that yod. A yod is like a long triangle, right? The finger of God. It's pointing towards the south node at 10 degrees in Scorpio on that full moon. And that means that Mars is having a positive relationship with Chiron. It's about healing wounds around courage, around bravery, around our leadership, around our self-identity and self-esteem, right? So we're working on that through this Mars retrograde as well. And then there's a release point. It's a full moon, so very meaningful. There's a release point at 10 degrees of Scorpio, the south node. So we're letting go of something. We are, you know, something is revealed to us and then we release it. So that's good. But then, one full moon after this one, which means 1 month, 2023, so this is the next year, again a yod, of course. And now, this time, the yod is pointing at Mars retrograde in Gemini. So now it's Mars who's the main character. Meaning that there is a very significant thing about Mars retrograde in Gemini on that date. A very significant thing that we're releasing around that mental preoccupation, something in our mental field that is affecting our energy and vitality, or affecting why we're doing what we're doing. It's about the use of words and communication, right? But also it's about, you know, let's not forget that Mars retrograde in Gemini is also about how we process anger mentally. How we use aggression verbally or mentally. How we can help that to fuel us instead of blocking us. Because anger and aggression isn't actually something that needs suppressing, which modern behavior, wants us to do. But it's actually that fuel, that acceleration that you need to power your goals, to power your motivation. So that reflection in the mind is also necessary around anger. So those are the lunation situations that are kind of important around this retrograde with Mars and Gemini. So sorry, the camera cut off because it's Mercury retrograde, right? So when Mars in Gemini goes direct, there's a post-shadow period. And when that ends, March the 12th or 13th of 2023, we have again that Neptune-Mars square, but this time both direct, right? Both highly energetic. Which means that both have processed whatever was going on during the retrograde, and there's another clash, and it's in full force. This does mean that there might be a lot more confusion because Neptune is direct, and much more illusion, deception, fantasy, unclarity. It could be almost so much that you want to escape reality. So be careful with the desire to use substance or anything like that to distract yourself. Be mindful and remember that ultimately Neptune is about connecting to the divine through meditation, prayer, rest, dream, silence. So I would hope that by then, by March, Mars has learned so much through the retrograde in Gemini that indeed our energy levels, our vitality is so rich, so pumped up, so evolved, because of incredible collected information and information that is finally processed thanks to the retrograde. Because what is really important to know is that between these degrees of Gemini, we've had the personal planets go over these Gemini points for the last few years. So we first had Venus go retrograde in Gemini in May and June of 2020, right? When the world was in such a chaotic place suddenly, when there, whatever happened, Then Mercury went retrograde in Gemini May, June of 2021, and also May, June of 2022 recently. And now the third personal planet going over these Gemini points is Mars in retrograde in Gemini, right? So that's very interesting that all these personal planets are going or went over these Gemini points the last 3 years. The last 3 years that this world has experienced massive change and turbulence and a flooding of information or misinformation. And I find it very significant that Mars is going over Gemini again. and also that it's squaring Neptune, which means that it's ultimately a cosmic push to level up, trust more, enhance our intuition more, but enhance also our mental capacity, our mental ability to decipher what is true and what is not, our ability to use words in a true manner, understanding the energy of communication, the power of words, the power of curiosity and information. And also in a very higher perspective, perhaps overcoming duality, because Gemini is about that, right? It's about the two, the opposites, the polarities. What is polarity? Black, white, man, woman, light, dark, anger, love, whatever, hate or love. And a very high expression, like the ultimate expression of Gemini, I feel that it's overcoming that duality, that oppositional polarity, and finding that the true meaning is one, not two. The true meaning is that there's a harmony between those polarities and that we need to seek those. And I feel that Neptune, with its divine power and higher perspective, is helping us to understand that, helping us to overcome the polarities. But it's going to do that with extreme polarity. It's going to do that with uncomfortable pushes. It might not feel nice because this is a square. This is tough energy between Mars and Neptune. And as I said earlier in this video, be careful of those accident-prone energies. Be careful of illusions and deception, of lies, and I guess the extreme of Pisces and Neptune could even be like losses and theft, and let's not forget that Mars is the planet of war and aggression and fighting. So with a square to Neptune, I feel that maybe some illusionary wars might take place, or very deceiving information, that's for sure. So now that you know this, it's better for you to navigate these waters. Remember, Mars is retrograde from October 30th till Friday the 13th of 2023, but there is a post-shadow period. That means that after Friday the 13th, Mars will be slowly picking up its pace. It will find its momentum Friday the 13th, and then it will speed up. But it will be at full speed again March 12th, 13th. So that's quite a period, quite a long period, and a long period with these Mars and Neptune squares. So be careful, work on your intuitive skills, and I hope you have a safe time. And remember that this too shall pass, whatever's going on, and that ultimately it's for for a higher lesson. And Neptune is definitely trying to push us into that more divine aspect of life. And I hope you have a good time. I hope you learn a lot. I hope you understand the power of words. And I would say have a safe and enlightening Mars retrograde period. See you in the next videos. Bye.